Welcome to the Archive Room podcast.
The Nation Station, Men's Radio.
Fastamai, I'm Judith Lay, and I'm very pleased to find you waiting for me at the door to the Archive Room, the place where we keep stories of island life in years gone by, told by the people who were there. So come on in, sit down and make yourself comfortable, and let's listen to this week's selection. On the 5th of July 1948, a great and novel undertaking began. It was the National Health Service. Free health care for everyone. But what was there before? In the archive room on the shelf marked H for Healthcare and Hospitals, I found the wonderful Nurse Joan Speedie, or should I say Nurse Joan Quiggin, for that was her unmarried name when she went to Nobles Hospital as a 15-year-old probationer in 1940. David Collister's conversation with Joan was recorded 25 years ago, when she was then in her late 70s. Joan's mother was from Lancashire and her father was Manx. So, after early years across, the Quiggin family moved to the island.
When I was 9, we came over here, and I've lived here ever since and wouldn't move at all. We lived in Castlemona Avenue, and we had 9 bedrooms, and we used to take about 20 people. And when I think of it, 4 sharing in rooms, but they all seemed very happy and didn't grumble at all. I left school at 14 and went to work in the Lexicon Library. Anyway, one day I was asked to go to a meeting at St Thomas's Church for the Girls' Friendly. And speaking at this meeting was Sister Dirth. Casually to my neighbour, I said, "Oh, I think I'd like to go nursing," when she told us all about it. Little did I realise that in a fortnight's time I would be walking through the doors of Nobles Hospital and starting as a probationer nurse.
Now, this would be the year 1940?
1940, May 1940.
So we were about 6 or 8 months into the war then, weren't we?
Yes, I can always remember it was the most beautiful sunny day. When we went to Nobles, we had to take with us a jar and a dish. And the jar was for our ration of sugar, and the dish was for our butter ration, which had to last us a week.
How did you make sure that it was kept to you and that other people didn't dip into it?
I think we put an adhesive tape underneath. Food was not very plentiful.
Did you have to have a medical? Did you get a uniform straight away, that sort of thing?
I didn't have very much of a medical. I can remember going to the doctor and he just said, "Oh, you're all right." No entrance exam, but I know I had about 10 aprons, a pair of cuffs which were about 5 inches long. They were celluloid, I think. You had to put your name in and you put them on the top of the duty room cupboard. But if you left that ward without your cuffs, you were told off, as no nurse walks the corridor without her cuffs on. They were most essential part of our duty. On the aprons and the dresses were quite long. And the caps, well, you had to pleat them and pin them on the back of your hair.
Now, let me ask you this then. Did you go into some sort of training school initially there?
Oh, no, nothing like that. I can remember the first week, and we slept in the big entrance, as it used to be going to the private wing. And you'll see there's 8 windows above the entrance. Mm-hmm. Well, that was the room for the probationers. We weren't called nurses, we were called probationers. The 8 of us were there.
But did you go straight on the wards virtually then?
We did. We went straight on the wards.
What sort of money would you get then?
Well, my starting wage was £1 12 shillings a month.
A month?
A month, 32 shillings. And that works out at 8 shillings a week. But not forgetting we got a full board and a bed. Nobles was actually registered as a training establishment because we had 100 beds. Now, there was 2 medical wards, and that would have male and female, and that was 20. 2 surgical, male and female, another 20 in each, so that was 2 40s. Children's ward, which was jutting out and you could see as you entered, we had 10 in there. Private wing was 12. and then orthopaedic was 20. So altogether that adds up to 122. Now the staff on the ward, one sister, they all seemed to look old to me. Mind you, I was only 18.
Yes.
But they seemed to be there forever. The staff those days did not leave. One staff nurse and 3 little probationers. So really and truly, there wasn't very much staff. Now, when I first went there, you did not get a day off. You worked the 7 days. You got a half a day. You were allocated 1 half day from 2 o'clock and every other Sunday a half day.
Yeah.
I can remember we had 2 housemen and they used to have to live in. Of course, there was Mr. Vernon, Dr. Macpherson, Daddy Woods, as we used to call him. I can remember Daddy Woods when he used to do appendix. He made one of the very small incisions, and I can also remember he used to sing when he was operating. Yeah. You know, and I don't think he knew he was singing, do, do, do. And he was so calm and collected.
Right.
But it's hard to believe that all we had was 2 ambulance men, Joe Lee and Alex Luthwaite. Now, apart from doing the ambulance, if a washer was needed on a tap or a light had gone out, blocked drains or anything, they used to come and fix. And Philip, the boiler man, who used to stoke up the boilers, and not forgetting Bob the gardener. Alex Luthwaite lived in the hospital house. If you can imagine the bend of the road, bend of the Westmoreland Road, going round. Well, the entrance was going down, and as soon as you went there, the first thing you saw was the Luthwaite house. Now, he lived there. He always lived there to my memory. Now, next door to Alec was the mortuary. Yes, it was just at the side of the house.
Right.
Alex sort of used to do everything. I mean, he used to be in the mortuary and everything. Now, would you like to hear something about the routine of the staff?
Oh, we most certainly would.
Well, the matron was a large lady, and she used to wear the big flowing cap. She was dressed in grey plain dress, and she lived on the premises. I can remember she used to take tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Sister White from the private wing used to come up with her to take tea. And all I ever knew what she did was take the letters round and meet the patients. Say, good morning, how are you feeling this
So you were getting your orders from the sisters, then, were you?
Yes, we were. We got our orders from the sisters. And as I say, they seemed to stay there for years and years.
Were they kind towards the newcomers, then, were they?
Well, it was very strict. Everybody slept in. Even the domestics slept in. The nurses slept on the first floor when you were promoted to your first year of nursing.
So it was an absolute genuine vocation in those days.
Oh, it had to be. You weren't allowed to go home to sleep. When we only got half a day, you had to be in for 10 o'clock or get an extension. You could get an extension to 11 o'clock.
Happily, change came about a year after Joan started at Nobles, giving nurses 1 day off each week, starting at 4 o'clock on the day before. So let's go back to Nobles Hospital on Westmoreland Road now. It's 1940 and Nurse Joan Quiggin is going to take us through her morning routine.
In the morning, we were called at 6:30 by the night sister. You had to go to breakfast in the dining room. On duty at 7:30. Now, 20 beds to make. In those days, patients did not walk about. They were more or less all kept to bed. An appendix was kept 12 days in bed, and hernias maybe was kept longer. So we had to start then and make the beds. All the pillowcase openings had to be away from the doors, so that when the doctor walked in, he couldn't see the inside of the pillows. And to this day, when I make a bed, I still put my pillows the right way. Now, the staff nurse would see to the sterilising of the bowls, for if there was any dressings. We had like a fish pan, it was like a big pan on the stove, and she used to boil these bowls, and they were put on the trolley with a sterile towel to cover. Now, her duty then was to do the flowers. Now, the probationer nurses, there'd be 2 of us, we had to sweep the floors, tidy the lockers, and wash them, every locker.
What was the routine for the patients? Were they up early?
Yes, 5:30. That is a bit early, but you must remember that with only one nurse, we had to wash the patients, sort out their teeth, because more people had false teeth, I think, in those days. There was 20 patients in a ward, 20 bowls to be given out to wash the people, hoping that they could wash themselves.
Yes.
And that took quite a while. And sometimes, if they were for operation, we had to give maybe an early morning enema. So we had to start very early.
What were they getting to eat early on then?
Well, that was a problem. The night before, we'd gone round with our tray and asked each patient, had they any extra food that they required for their breakfast. We'd made porridge, but we also had to do the toast. We used to have to start making the toast quite early. I often wondered what the toast must have tasted like. But some of the healthy, hungry ones brought eggs and maybe a slice of bacon. And at the very extreme, a kipper, but not encouraged. So as you can imagine, if there was only one nurse, we had to try and organise this breakfast.
Yes.
Because we had backs and pressure areas to attend to, and to make the patients comfortable. The patients had a full dinner, about 12:15. Now this was the only full meal that the patients had, because they supplied their own breakfast and we gave them toast, but they could bring their own things in. We used to obviously give a milky drink at 10:30. Well, there was no funding somehow in those days, was there?
And no evening meal for them then?
No, they didn't get an evening meal. And of course you were supposed to do 3 months night duty. But when you're on night duty, there was one nurse to one ward.
And a probationer?
No, we had one runner between us. So down in surgical, where the 2 big surgical wards are, one nurse on one ward and one nurse on the other. And you'd be the probationer, you see. You would run from ward to ward. And whatever the nurse wanted, you would do, and then they would shout you from the other, you see.
Yes.
But there didn't seem the drama in those days.
Young Joan Quiggin is nursing in the early years of the Second World War, so daily routine would include putting up and taking down of big, heavy blackout covers for every window. Probably even more challenging was responding to the air raid siren.
Well, that was a carry-on. What we had to do, when the siren went, the ARP men were supposed to come. But remember, they didn't have transport. They didn't have cars in
So they were
those
just
days.
walking on, were they?
Some of them maybe come on bikes, I don't quite know. But the siren would go, and if you were on the top medical landing, we had to move the patients down the lifts to the basements. And I can see me now wheeling these beds. We took them in the beds, and where do you think we put them? We put them down the basements where all the big pipes are. And obviously we could only take 2 in a lift, 2 beds. And by the time we got them down, the siren went for the all
Get them
clear.
back up again.
So we had to put them. Nobody seemed to grumble in those days.
No.
I don't know why, you just took it all in your stride.
Joan Speedie's memories of her nursing at Nobles Hospital give us a clear and fascinating insight into routines and patient care during the Second World War. And we'll definitely hear more from her in the future about care of patients with tuberculosis, the private patients wing, outpatient care, drug treatments, and much more. But listen now as Joan finds her true vocation.
I was put in theatre very, very early in my hospital days. And it's so funny. I never recognised shine at anything. But as soon as I walked in that theatre, I felt at home. I absolutely loved it. And my mother was horrified. She used to say, "You'll never stick that because you're too soft." When I used to come home off duty, she says, "You smell." And obviously, I was smelling of the ether. Because in those days, it was a mask and the doctor used to dribble this stuff over. I really loved in that theatre. There always seemed to be a lot of gastric ulcers in those days somehow. Well, the instruments were boiled every morning in a big fish pan. Well, Sister used to see to them. All these notorious-looking instruments were in this glass cupboard.
They'd give anybody a fright looking at them, probably.
Well, it would, actually. You didn't come back to work after you got married. And I was going to get married in the December. And I can always remember Mr. Vernon came in to me and said, "I know you like theatre." And he said, "If you will, we would like to send you away to train." I started to cry, actually, because I was so upset that I was going to leave to get married. I said, "I'm awfully sorry. I can't." And that was the start of sending the nurses away
All right. Yes.
to train.
What year would that be then when you decided to
Very
go?
end of 1945.
That's before National Health Service came in, so
Yes,
all this was
yes.
pre-National Health, yeah.
Yes. Well, I left Nobles and got married and stayed at home and took a small boarding house for about 20 years. And one day I met one of the nurses and she said to me, "Why don't you come back nursing, Joan," she said, "and do night duty? You know," she said, "you get £5 a night." And that was in 1968. So I went back, having been left over 20 years.
Yes.
And I went back and I did 2 nights for a while and then 1 night, and I stayed 14 years at Nobles Hospital.
How different was it then from when you'd been there before?
Well, I was absolutely amazed at the marvellous things that the staff could do. I was just in awe, especially in the intensive care unit. They were so cool and calm about it, but they were really darn good. And if I had the chance of going back nursing, I would do it all over again because I enjoyed every minute of it.
Wonderful nursing memories from the early 1940s from Joan Speedie. And now we're going to do a bit of construction work as David Collister introduces you to a young surveyor called Bill Dennard, who's coming to the island to help to build Ronaldsway Airport. And if you think this is going to be all about bricks and tarmac and technical things, well, you might be in for a few surprises.
In 1943, notices of compulsory purchase were served on the owners of 3 farms in the south of the island, the Creggans, Ballagillia and Ronaldsway. They were taken over by the Admiralty as a Royal Navy air station to train air crews to fly Barracudas. 850 acres of farmland were commandeered, with subsequently over 500 men working on the site. With the end of the war, this was to become more like the Ronaldsway Airport that we know today. The British firm of John Lang & Sons were appointed as the main contractors for the work to convert the farmland into an aerodrome. They brought with them their key workers, many of whom were billeted in Castletown. And among them was surveyor Bill Dennard, later to become a partner with the Manx architects Davison Marsh and Co., and, incidentally, chairman of Clucas's Laundry. William Dennard was born in Carlisle in 1925. He was educated in London, but in 1942 or thereabouts he went back to Carlisle to begin his working career.
Then I was employed by John Lanes, the builders, on the construction of Crosby-on-Eden Airport there. Then, after that, I was given my instructions to go to a place called the Isle of Man, and I had to go to a place called the Castlemona Hotel. Found Castlemona by walking down the promenade, because it was all covered in camps and Italians, and I went to this hotel. Then I was told that if I wanted any help, I'd better go to the Labour Exchange and get a labourer to carry the level staff. I managed that, and then I had to do the initial ground survey. That meant setting out a rough line of the runway, taking a 50-foot grid each side, all the way along on each of the 4 runways with myself and this chap. And of course, as you measure out from the centre line, you might hit a hedge.
Of course.
So you plotted where the hedge was, all this, and you finished up with a complete hand-measured site.
How many runways were being worked on then? Was it
Working on all 4 at once,
Right, yeah.
trying to stabilise it. Just down at where the sanatorium used to be, the King Bill Sanatorium, just there it was a big bog. I mean, it's something entirely new to us. It was an old banksman said, fill that with gorse. And cut a long story short, it's exactly what we did. Filled the bog with gorse under the runway, and it's been there and it's never moved. Rolled it, put it in, rolled it, put it more in, rolled it, put more in and rolled it, and then filled it up with hardcore. Yeah, that was just behind where the sanatorium was. So you learn something every day.
Yes. There'd be one runway already there, presumably, for the air traffic that was already coming in.
No. Planes used to land at the back of the houses in Derby Haven on a field.
So there was no proper runway as such?
No, it was just grass.
They were still coming in while the Ronaldsway work was going on, presumably, during this period?
Yes.
So this would be 1943?
February 43 when I first came.
So where was there a site office somewhere? Where'd that be?
First, it started off where we actually went into the farmhouse of the Cregans.
Right.
That was vacant.
Mm-hmm.
And we shared it with the Air Ministry. Then, as more people came, we were pushed out into a wooden hut alongside the Cregans.
Yes.
And that was our headquarters, surveyor's department. It was do everything you could.
For all these men then, there's 500 men there, presumably there's half an hour or whatever for lunchtime. They would have to have washing, toilet facilities and so on?
Primitive. Very primitive. The toilet was in the centre of the runways, at the intersection of the 4 runways, which comprised a fence, if you could so call it, about 4 feet high, covered with canvas. So nobody could be seen, of course, behind this. And one day there was an emergency landing of I think it was a Lancaster, from memory, and it was sliding down towards this intersection across the grass, and I happened to be there watching this, petrified in case it was going to mow the whole thing down. I didn't know if there was anyone in there, but anyway, cut a long story short, it started to slow down quite rapidly, and the nose of the aircraft pushed into the canvas a couple of feet. That's about all. But at that very point in time, about 5 or 6 chaps ran out pulling up their trousers. Because nobody was hurt, but everybody was laughing their heads off. Unfortunately, the pilot and crew and the aircraft were all right.
So these are kind of happy memories of working there, but of course you'd come in, I think you said in the winter, in February was it? The conditions, the weather conditions must have been rough at times, I think.
I don't remember it being terribly bad, actually.
No.
When I was doing the survey, I used to get dreadful hay fever. But it made no difference. You couldn't have a day off because there was a war on, and we used to work from early morning till we'd finished our job for the day, which could be any time.
Yes.
There wasn't any question about not staying on. Everybody was keen to push it on.
So it was done fairly quickly, all this, really.
Oh yes, I think the runways are operational by the time we came in February, be June the next year.
Because it was the Admiralty that were actually at Ronaldsway at that time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We work with them and the Fleet Air Arm. It was the Fleet Air Arm that sort of gave the instructions via the Admiralty.
Yeah. Were you there when the first aircraft started coming in and using those runways?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What do you remember that?
Well, it wasn't anything new, actually.
No.
Because when they'd finished 2709, which is the longest one, they'd just got it blinded on the top, and we're about to put the tarmac in, and Jimmy Hesketh, Jimmy was, what would you call him, air traffic controller.
Oh, yes.
Down in the Ronaldsway buildings.
Right.
Got a telephone call from him. Somebody shouted, "What do I do about this?" I said, "What?" He said, "There's DC-3 in trouble, wants to land." I said, "Well, I don't know. can't give him permission. He said, well, you've got to do something. I said, all right, we'll go down and chase the men off. So we had to jump in our old banger down the runway and say, get out of the way. And they landed.
This was before it was tarmac, was
Oh,
it?
yeah. They landed and I said, stopped. What's the matter? Having trouble with the port engine. They weren't having any trouble at all with the port engine.
Right.
The doors opened, out came a jeep. We'll just go and see what we can do about it.
Oh,
And they went around all the farms, got all the eggs they could lay their hands on. Drove back, took off. And it happened about 3 times with the ring up and stopped them. They were coming from Anglesey, I think.
Right.
Had to stop it in the end. But we had 1 or 2 genuine emergency where they had to really clear the men seriously, get them off the runways and let them come down.
Now, the terminal buildings then weren't going up at this time, were they? Or what was there?
Well, you know, the control tower, well, we were actually building that. That's it.
Oh, you were building it?
That'd be early on. That'd be during 43. And it's a brick build, it's as it is. The top is new, of course.
Right, yes.
But it's the original building.
And of course, all this was being paid for, although Langs were your employers, it was UK government was paying all this, presumably?
Yes, we were told we were being paid by the Admiralty, if that meant anything. But it's still the taxpayer, isn't it, at the end of the day.
And was pay good or poor or...?
Do you know, we never thought about it. No. As long as we had enough. I think we used to go out on a Saturday night, and that was our lot. We used to go walking. I think Roy Gardner and I climbed every hill and mountain in the Isle of Man during that time.
Right.
There was a crowd of us when we eventually lived with the Walkers at Bell Abbey. There was George Thompson. He was an architect. He was much older than we were. There was Frank Ballard. Frank was hell-bent on being a structural engineer. Then there was Roy and myself. And of course we fell in love with the island, and that was it.
Young surveyor Bill Dennard went across, finished all his qualifications that had been interrupted by the war years, and came back to the island as quickly as he could and never left it again. Now it's time for part 2 of our archive room serial, The Little Dark Cupboard. The serialisation in 8 parts of a play for radio directed by Mrs. Olga Gray. The cast is drawn from the island's drama groups of 50 years ago, and later in the series I'll give you their names. But just for now, see if you can recognise these well-known voices as we return to the sitting room of an isolated house in a remote corner of Dartmoor, where Bill and Eva have taken refuge after getting lost in thick fog. They know nothing about the house or its occupants, just that the door was, thankfully, unlocked. Bill is calm and quite curious. Eva is not. She's hysterical. The fog, swirling around the house and pressing on the windows, terrifies her. Thank goodness for Bill and his hip flask of brandy.
Are you feeling better?
Well, I still don't like it. But it's not quite so bad. I haven't got that awful panicky feeling anyway. I suppose it's the brandy that settled me.
Sweet to the uses of Martel's 3-star.
Claustrophobia. You know, Bill, I can trace it right back to the beginning, to the very first time it ever happened.
Uh-huh.
I was a lanky 12-year-old, staying at Aunt Athalia's house in the country. I used to go there every spring and summer. Someone had given me an old camera. Oh, it was a museum piece, really. You know the kind, box-shaped, with plates, not films. And one day I wanted to load it with new plates, and it had to be done in the dark. In the dark, Bill. So do you know what I did? I crept into a little dark cupboard under the back stairs, where the maids kept brushes. I tried to pull the door to, so that the catch didn't quite catch. You see, it had to be completely dark, not a chink of light. But, well, I pulled just a little too hard, and there was a click, and I was shut in the pitch black dark. I was shut in, Bill.
Oh, poor Eva. I wouldn't have liked that very much myself.
Oh, it It was like being buried alive or in a diving bell at the bottom of the sea and knowing that the cable snapped and you're there in the dark until you suffocate.
I bet you yelled, eh?
Oh, I yelled and I beat on the door with my fists. But nobody heard me, Bill, not for ages. And then it was Smitty, dear Smitty, who was out in the garden mowing the lawn, who heard, and he came rushing into the house. When they dragged me out, I was a gibbering, whimpering wreck, and barely conscious. I was in bed for nearly a week with my knuckles all bandaged. You know, I've often wondered what would have happened to me if Smitty hadn't been mowing the lawn that day and hurt me. What would have happened?
Smitty?
Oh, his real name was Smithers, and he was the under gardener. Oh, and I adored him. He used to show me where the most secret birds' nests were, and how to tickle trout. And he made lovely little boats for me to sail on the green, scummy tanks in the glass houses. And then, when I was about 14, he married Annie, the parlour maid, and they both went away. To London, I think. Do you know, Bill, I was quite heartbroken. Things like that can hurt quite dreadfully when one's young. I suppose I must have been a little in love with him at that age. Wasn't it ridiculous?
Not a bit. At the age of 10, I had a burning passion for a waitress in a cafe I used to be taken to as a rare treat. She was very thin, very dark, and very pale. And they called her Mimi.
Oh, I think I'd like a cigarette, please.
Yeah, so would I, but I don't think we ought to make ourselves too much at home, love. The owners of this house may be rabid non-smokers.
Gosh, do you know, I'd completely forgotten that we're actually trespassers here.
Well, we're certainly that.
I wonder what they're like, the people who live here. It's a nice room, anyway. There's something friendly about it. I've got a feeling that they're very, very nice people, Bill.
The kind of who simply love to find a couple of complete strangers squatting in their sitting rooms. Splendid!
And what's more, I should think that that's quite a good picture. Shouldn't you?
Well, don't ask me, love. You're the amateur art connoisseur, not I.
And I'd be right, too. It's by Alison Reethy. It's signed.
And who's she when she's at home, anyway?
Oh, Alison Reethy is one of the most wonderful women painters of the day. Flower studies mostly. Well, whoever lives here must have pretty good taste and plenty of money. This picture's worth a mint, I bet.
Well, let's hope they're rolling and ask us to stay to a champagne lunch, eh?
What I'd like to know is what's happened to them. Surely they wouldn't just wander off and leave the door unlocked for anyone to walk in. They can't be far off, can they?
Probably behind that curtain, listening to every word we say.
Oh, no. Oh, you're trying to frighten me, aren't you, Bill?
Well, maybe it was a little draft that made the curtains move a few seconds ago. Or just my fancy. Well, what are you waiting for, Eva? Aren't you going to look?
No, we've no right to poke and pry.
All right. If you won't, then I will. I'm not scared.
Oh, no, Bill, you're not to. No, please, don't.
Is Bill making a big mistake? Did the curtain move? And if it did, what's behind it? Come back to the archive room next Thursday for another episode of The Little Dark Cupboard, the serialisation of a play for radio directed by Mrs. Olga Gray, recorded and broadcast on Manx Radio 50 years ago, with a cast drawn from the island's drama groups, and later in the series I'll give you their names. I'll have more memories from great characters of island life to share with you when we meet at the archive room door at the same time, 5:30 next Thursday evening. But for now, let's turn off the lights and close the door. I'm Judith Lay, saying thank you for listening and wishing you a very good evening.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.